Seals of Forgotten Time Chapter 2. Naruto sat in a classroom, inside of the Academy for Ninjas in Training, a week after resting in the hospital. Of course he had been questioned by the Naruto about where he had come from, but he feigned ignorance about his origin. Since, obviously he had no clue about how he had even got here in the first place. And what's worse, he had to attend the Academy, yet again. He didn't want to go to the Academy again, but Tobirama had already spoke with the sensei about his enrollment, so it was out of his power. The blonde was obviously agitated. Back in his time, history was his absolute worst subject, more so than math. And now he's back in time, so you can obviously see his dilemma. I hate history, I hate history, I hate history, he continued to say in his mind before a dim light bulb went off in his head. Wait a minute. I am history, he thought as tears came to his eyes. He fought back a sniff as the sensei walked in and began writing on the board. The blonde had met with the sensei a couple days ago, when the man had visited him in the hospital when the Hokage had first spoke to him. Of course nothing was said about his bloodline, as absolutely none of them had an idea about where it came from, excluding Naruto, who had an inkling about where it came from. Said sensei was a man, a jounin, judging by his jounin-style flak jacket. He was in his early 20s, he had black hair and a serious look on his face that wasn't worn when he met with Naruto. My name is Uchirayoko. As you know, we are at war with two of the 5 great nations, consisting of both Iwagakure and Kumogakure and a couple of small insignificant villages. We have our newest ally Sunagakure to help us, but the tide in this war could easily be shifted when Mizugakure gets forced into the conflict. Whatever side they join would have the upper hand in this war. But fear not, for we are in the village of Konoha, and if we survive the last war we can definitely survive this one, he said, his face softening up as he pumped his fist in the air. The students responded in kind and pumped their own little fists. Even Naruto pumped his fist, his national pride not wavering with the time travel. Now let's begin with introductions, starting with you, Ryoko said, pointing at Naruto. You didn't tell me your name when we met in the hospital, but now, he said, smirking. Introduce yourself. The blonde stood to his feet. Hello fellow classmates, my name is Uzumaki Naruto. I don't know where I came from, but I do know that I was found about 15 miles outside of Hinokuni. I don't know who my parents are, but all they left me is my name, he said, telling them half of the truth, since until recently all he had from his parents was his name. The teacher held his hand up, stopping the blonde from continuing. That's enough, child, all I wanted was your name, he said, studying him as if he had heard that name from somewhere. It was at the tip of his tongue but he couldn't remember. He dropped the issue and focused on the class as a whole. Now, as this is a new batch of students, I would like each of you to stand and tell me your name, he said, pointing to the first student. Naruto began sitting down. He looked around the room, before he noticed a blonde girl staring at him. She looked oddly familiar as his blue eyes bore into recognizable hazel eyes. He turned his head and looked out the window. Listening to the students begin to tell their names caused his mind to drift. When that happened, he began to think about his possession of the Rinnegan and the disappearance of the Kyuubi. He remembered reading his mother's journal. It said that this ancient bloodline only came to the most unique of the Uzumaki clan. But Nagato had it. Did that mean that he was an Uzumaki? And what exactly happened to the Kyuubi? Naruto thought as his ears picked up the calling of another student. My name is Sanjutsu Tsunade, she simply said as she sat back down. Naruto focused on the class, and there she was, the same girl that he had shared a short staring contest with. Now that he got a second look, he could completely recognize her. She was a young, really young version of Tsunade. She had the same light blonde hair, except it was short and in a small single ponytail. She was wearing a gray shirt that didn't contain any assets, unlike the one she wears when she gets older, that contains just about the biggest pair of marshmallows known to man. Her hazel eyes were filled with both the love of living with her parents and her granduncle, who was the Naruto, and confusion about the blonde across the room. Her pants were dark green and she wore basic ninja sandals. When he began to feel amazed by her young looks, he shook his head and forced himself not to slap himself. Of course she was young, she was only 5 years old. She really did look like a complete contrast of the Sannin he knew and loved. But now presented with the opportunity to witness the growth of Sannin was making him not regret coming back in time. He shook his head again. "Stop thinking about your surrogate mother like that," he said in his mind. "But this opportunity is the best that ever happened. Maybe now she could become more than a mother," he thought again as his inner pervert began fighting his outer righteousness. He stopped his inner battle when he heard Jiraiya introduce himself. He looked the same. Kind of. The only difference was the red marks on his cheeks were non-existent. He also doubted the kid was a lecher like his older self. Sannin. Naruto thought, keeping tears from falling from his eyes as he looked at his sensei. And then it was Orochimaru. Either Naruto's mind was playing tricks on him, or did Orochimaru actually look kind in appearance? And the polite way he introduced himself was way too sophisticated. The blonde scowled, thinking it was a trick, as Orochimaru could never be nice. The scowl left his face only for it to be replaced with a temporary surprised visage at seeing the legendary Sannin so young and weak. At the moment. This just added to the proof that he somehow traveled back in time. It wasn't Madara's doing, as he didn't specialize in time but dimensions. Wait, does his time-space ninjutsu count? Naruto thought offhandedly. Alright class, that's enough for today. I expect you here tomorrow for a much longer day, when I will begin your training, he said, seeing some of his students groan in displeasure. Now, none of that. This war demands more ninjas to fight our adversaries, and that's where I come in. I'm here to whip you children into battle-ready ninjas, he said, dismissing the class. His students looking forward to enjoying their last peaceful day. Naruto walked out of the class with a thoughtful look on his face. His inner furball hadn't said a single thing, or even made a single noise, since he came to this time. "Hey furball, are you in there?" the blonde yelled in his mind. No answer, just like the other times. Maybe he needed to go into his mindscape and confront the giant manifestation of chakra. But now wasn't the time to worry about the fox. Now was the time to find a place of residence, since he couldn't stay in the hospital forever, no matter how nice the nurses were. He headed to the only place where said residence was going to be given to him at his age. Naruto appeared at the Hokage Tower, realizing that with the memory, his skills also remained. The blonde was beyond ecstatic. He didn't have to worry about staying in the academy. If he already had the same skills that prevented him from losing the fight against Sasuke and lasting as long as he did against Madara. That made him think about the past as he walked into the building. No, not the past, the future, but also his past. Or future. Naruto shook his head of the confusing thoughts and walked into the office with a beastly grin. "Hey old man." Tobirama looked at Naruto with a shocked look on his face. The other occupant in the room chuckled at the greeting. "It seems he's more exuberant than you let on, Tobirama-sensei." The young sage looked at the other occupant to see a far younger version of the grandfather figure in his past life. "Gigi," he thought, keeping the grin on his face and preventing tears from falling to the floor. "Naruto-kun, what have I told you about calling me that? I'm not even old," Tobirama said, resting his chin on one of his hands. Naruto smiled at seeing both of his Gigis. "Well, compared to my age, you're pretty old," he said, smiling wider. "We do have about a 25 gap in our ages, unless you're not 30 like you told me," he said, slightly bouncing on the balls of his feet. Hiruzen looked at the young sage in slight amazement. "Are you sure you're only 5? He said, chuckling at his own question. "Oh, you have no idea," Naruto thought, smiling even wider, and that was possible. Tobirama let out a big sigh. Forget about what his age could be. "Ooh, where are my manners, Naruto? This Sarutobi Hiruzen, me and my brother have taught him everything he knows." "Hiruzen, this is Uzumaki Naruto-kun, the child I told you about." Sarutobi looked at Naruto and thought, Naruto-kun, do you know anything about Uzumaki Miho?" he asked, getting a confused look out of the blonde. "Never mind, Naruto-kun, forget I asked you," he said, leaning back into his chair. keeping his other question out of his mind since it wasn't his business. Tobirama could see that the child didn't have an idea about anybody from his own clan, so he decided to change the subject. "So Naruto-kun, what are you doing here?" The blonde looked at the cage. "I don't have a place to stay. I came here to ask for an apartment for myself." The two adults looked at Naruto before sharing a look. After a short second they began to laugh. This irritated Naruto for obvious reasons. "Why are you laughing? This isn't funny," he yelled with his Rinnegan blazing to life, radiating in anger, and a weird and dangerous silvery aura surrounded Naruto. The current and future cages stopped their laughter when they literally seen the misty aura appear around the oblivious blonde. "Calm down, Naruto-kun, we just find it amusing that a child your age wants to live by themselves, and sort of awkward. Now you're not staying by yourself," the Nidaime said. The Rinnegan and the aura disappeared as Naruto let out a nervous chuckle. "Yeah, that is awkward, isn't it?" he said, rubbing the back of his head in embarrassment. "But, where else can I stay other th?" He stopped when he noticed the cage's smile was getting bigger the more he said. "You're not thinking what I think you're thinking, are you?" After a nod of the cage's head the blonde shook his. "No disrespect, Hokage-sama, but I decline your offer," the blonde said, crossing his arms. Tobirama smirked at the blonde. "Nonsense, I've already completed the paperwork. All I need is your signature," he said, opening his drawer and taking out a piece of paper. "Here you go, just sign at the X's," he said, giving Naruto a pen. "I still decline, I don't want to impose on you and your family," he said, leaving the paper in front of him. "You're not, it's only me, my nephew and his wife and my grandniece," he said, smiling softly. "You mean," he said before the door behind him opened and a young Sannin ran to her uncle. "Oji-san," she said, running straight to her granduncle, hopping over Naruto and the desk and landed right on his chest, and proceeded to hug the life out of him. "Oomph," he grunted as Tsunade landed on his chest. "Tsu-chan, how was your first day at the academy?" he asked. "Nothing really interesting happened, but there was this other blonde boy that had an even more interesting surname." "What was it again?" she murmured, putting a finger to her chin in thought. "Uzumaki," Naruto said, knowing he was the one she was talking about. She turned her hazel eyes towards him and gasped in surprise at seeing him again so soon. "What are you doing here?" she asked, turning her body to sit on her granduncle's lap. Naruto began to sit up, slowly remembering the tempered Tsunade had from his time, and wondered, no hope it didn't come to the surface now. "Well, you see, there's a funny story about that," he said, looking at Tobirama, silently asking for help. "Really a funny story, can I hear?" she asked, oblivious about his odd behavior. "Well, you see, Tsunade-chan, Naruto-kun here is going to be staying with us," the Hokage said. "Why?" she screamed. "I didn't actually sign the paper yet, Tsunade-san," the blonde boy said. "Well, good, don't. It's not that easy, Tsu-chan. I want Naruto-kun to live with a family, and I don't like you being too lonely in the house," Tobirama said. "I'm not alone, I have San and Ka-chan," she whined. "And plus he could live with Mito-san, she's an Uzumaki," she said, looking at her granduncle. "That's a negative, Tsu-chan. Naruto here doesn't know about Mito-san or his clan," he explained. Hiruzen had been watching the scene and knew he had to think of something before things got out of hand, and soon he got an idea. "How about I take Naruto-kun into my house?" interrupting the small argument between granduncle and grandniece. All eyes turned to Sarutobi. "Really, Sarutobi-san?" Naruto said, hoping his old grandfather figure was serious about his offer. He nodded. "Sure, just because I'm 20 doesn't mean I don't know how to take care of a kid. Plus, after the death of mother and father in the last war, I can sympathize with the little blonde," he said, leaning over to rub Naruto's head. Said blonde squirmed out from under the man's hand and smiled at Tobirama. "I agree with that idea, can I please?" he pleaded at the Nidaime, with Tsunade joining in. The Nidaime closed his eyes and shook his head. This caused the blondes to look at each other and nod. When the Nidaime opened his eyes, two puppy dog-eyed jutsus were upon him. One pair of teary hazel eyes and one pair of ocean blue eyes. Oh no, my only weakness, he thought before he dropped his head and sighed in defeat. The two blondes cheered and would have high-fived, but they were too far apart from each other. Sarutobi chuckled, thinking back to how this playful blonde was not even 10 minutes ago. Such a strong aura and that odd doujutsu of his, I must find out more about it, he thought, watching as Tobirama made a new document and they all signed it. XXX The streets of Konoha XXX. The happy young sage was walking through the village with Sarutobi at his side. He was even more amazed at all the people walking in the village, since this was obviously before the Second and Third Wars and the Kyuubi reduced the population. This brought his attention back to the subject of the fox. Since he was back in time, did its chakra or a mind or something go back to the body in this time or what? When are we going to get to your house? He asked, looking at Sarutobi. Hiruzen smiled. What do you mean, we're there? He said, walking towards a 2-story house. I recently moved out of the small compound, because even with its size, it was too big for one person. He explained, opening his door. The house was simple, medium-sized living room, large kitchen with an island dining table, 2 bathrooms, 3 bedrooms and a study library. Don't you think it's like the same thing? Naruto asked. What do you mean? Well, you moved out of a compound, only to move into a large house. Don't you think it's the same thing? Naruto asked, yawning a little. Sarutobi walked into the kitchen to get some water. I guess you're right. Yet again you surprise me, he said, walking into the living room to find Naruto asleep on the couch. Hiruzen smiled and brought a spare blanket from his closet and draped it over the child's body. He rubbed his head and walked up the stairs to fix up the guest room for his new Otauto. XXX Naruto's Mindscape XXX. Naruto walked through his mindscape after falling asleep on the couch. It was the only opportunity he had to literally jump into his mind. He walked around in the murky water. He looked down into his reflection to see his 17-year-old self. This was further proved when he noticed he was taller and his hands were bigger. He focused on his eyes to see the Rinnegan. Seeing it in this form was weirder than seeing it in his younger self. He looked around and noticed the pipes that signified his chakra pathways were much larger and glowed silver with tinges of blue. I don't remember my chakra being that color. But then again, it seems right for some reason, he thought as he continued walking in his mindscape. The more he walked, the more perplexed he became. By this time he could hear the fox either calling him toward the caged room or its snoring. But now it was silent and that put him on edge. He walked into the room to see the cage, but there was nothing behind it. He squinted his eyes at the cage and he could barely make out the outline of the fox's body. After having it in his sights, it became fully visible. It looked asleep, but he could tell something else was wrong with it. He took a step and was shocked to feel a small earthquake. He was even more shocked to see the figure of the fox breaking down, collapsing onto the floor. Soon all that remained was darkness. The remains of the fox fully disintegrated, and Naruto, who was completely speechless. Sochi, is that you? A voice asked from what seemed like everywhere. The blonde became alert and he jumped back and willed everything around him to turn to a sunlight clearing, with absolutely no trees to hide behind. He looked around for the intruder, keeping the amazement off his face at the sudden change in the area. He turned completely around to see a woman behind him, and that's when he remembered what the oddly familiar woman said to him. Son? He thought, taking a closer look at the woman to fully realize that she was indeed his mother. How did you get in my mind? What happened to the Kyuubi just now? How did the area turn like this? Why do I have the Rinnegan? He nearly screamed the last question at her. Kushina walked to her son, her flaming red hair blowing in a non-existent wind. She wore a plain red kimono that hid a full pair of C-cup breasts and a black obi tied around her waist. The blonde noticed that said waist was slimmer than the hologram he witnessed at his father's house, back in the original time. She was barefoot, allowing the grass to tickle her feet. She smiled at the barrage of questions and tears prickled at the corners of her eyes, one question at a time. She said before engulfing her son in a hug. At first the blonde relaxed into his mother's embrace, but anger bubbled to the surface. He grabbed her shoulders and pushed her back a little, keeping a hold of her. Do you have any idea about what kind of life I've lived? How dare you act like you haven't deserted me? He said, letting go of her and taking a step backward. I've had about the worst childhood in the history of Konoha, and it's all your fault. He spoke to her between clenched teeth, it being the only thing keeping him from lashing out. The tears fell from the mother's eye before she sniffled, her own anger rising to the surface. You really think it's my fault for dying? How selfish of you to think something like that. You have no idea what I went through to get into the position I'm in at the moment. She told her son, her tone being borderline murderous. She was that mad at her son. You really think I wanted to leave a baby, my infant son, alone in a village that I knew was going to hate you? With you being the host of the demon that just killed most of their loved ones, it's guaranteed that they'll resent you. She scowled at him. This angered Naruto more than it should have, and he activated his Rinnegan in anger. Kushina smirked at seeing the Uzumaki bloodline in her son, the smirk being more prideful. It seems I touched a nerve somehow. Well, let's see if you know how to use those legendary eyes, she said, getting into a stance. My thoughts exactly, Naruto said, running straight at his mother. XXX 1 mind hour later XXX. The crimson-haired mother stood over her child, softly shaking her head. You did pretty good. Your only strength was your regular skills. Your skills with your eyes was absolutely horrendous. By the time I was your age I had already mastered the different techniques these eyes have to offer, she said. After the short fight with his mother, Naruto, whose body was covered in cuts and bruises, couldn't find the energy to move his limbs. He stayed laying on the floor looking at the cloudless sky. The apparent anger he held for his mother had ended along with the fight. He turned his head to look at his mother, whose body was without a single scoff. Of course, I just received these new eyes of mine. Wait. What do you mean you mastered these eyes? He asked, bolting to his feet, surprising his mother. How is he moving so soon after the beating he just endured? She asked herself. She was brought back to reality when she heard the question being asked again. It seems you still don't understand, she said, shaking her head, before a force pushed Naruto back. Naruto's body was flung across the field, before it landed making a small crater. The blonde, yet again, watched the cloudless sky. I am so tired of that technique, he thought as his mother appeared in his vision. You see, son, these eyes only show up in a few shinobis of the Uzumaki clan. Only 5 others have ever had the privilege of having these eyes in the last 200 years. She spoke, extending a hand to help her son up. Naruto reached for said hand. That still doesn't explain what happened to the Kyuubi, or why I have these eyes, he said, standing to his feet. She shrugged her shoulders. Apparently you are of the select few, which is untold of. A parent with the eyes breeds another with the eyes. It's even more amazing that this happened. What happened to the Kyuubi? I have no idea. If I was to take an educated guess, I would have to say with the activation of your eyes you've unlocked the seal and fully absorbed the beast, she said as trees were added to the clearing. Naruto pondered on what his mother told him before he got another question. But if I absorbed the Kyuubi, shouldn't my chakra be crimson or blue? Why is it silver? He asked, leaning against a tree. Does it look like I have all the answers? She snapped, scaring her son. She covered her mouth and blushed in embarrassment. Sorry, short fuse. The blonde sighed as he shook his head. That's my mother all right, he thought, remembering his own short fuse, until he thought of something. Wait, since I'm back in time. Am I still your son or what? He asked, getting a confused look out of her. I never wondered about. Technically you'll be older than me by the time I have you, that is if you don't change history or anything, she said, mumbling the last part. Well, still does it look like? Yeah, he said, interrupting her with a wave of his hand. Okay, I have a question you can answer, too, actually. What are you doing in my mind, and just what did you do to get here? He asked, crossing his arms. Kushina crossed her own arms under her breast. The reason I'm in your mind is to teach you how to use your Rinnegan. Exactly how I got here is a story for another day, she said, chuckling at the look Naruto gave her. Now is the time for your mind to rest along with your body. I'll see you again, my son," she said as Naruto faded from view. XXX Real World the next day. XXX Naruto woke up with a yawn, forgetting about the trip to his mind, as the scent of bacon and eggs invaded his nostrils. He looked around and found himself inside of a plain-looking room, laying in a bed far bigger than his body. He looked down to see that he was in the same attire from yesterday. He got out of the bed to notice a pair of dark gray training sweats and a tight and sleeveless light gray shirt. His stomach growled and he promptly took a quick bath and changed into the gray clothing. They felt a little loose on him, but he just shrugged his shoulders and walked downstairs. Thinking of a good prank, he lowered his chakra signature and stealthily sneaked up to Sarutobi. "Good morning, Naruto-kun. I see your energy has returned with the nap you took," said brown-haired man said, turning around and popping the young blonde on the head with a spatula. "Atai," Naruto said, rubbing his head. "That hurt. Why'd you do that?" he said with tears approaching the edges of his eyes. Hiruzen smiled at the young child in front of him. "Nice try, Naruto-kun. I'm not going to fall for that. Unlike Sensei, I'm immune to that," he said, turning back to the cooking food. "That was close. Any longer and I would have apologized," he thought as Naruto grumpily walked to the dining table. "So what's the plan for today?" Naruto asked as Hiruzen set a plate of bacon and eggs in front of him. "Well, you're going to go to the academy, and I'm going to get ready for a mission," Sarutobi said as a messenger hawk began to peck on the kitchen window. The blonde groaned, remembering about having to go to school. He quickly ate his breakfast and exited the house. He found himself in the section of the village where the clans of said village resided. Of course, the Sarutobi clan, even though Hiruzen is the last one, it was still considered a clan in the eyes of the village. Only because of the strength wielded by Hiruzen. The point being, he was on the other side of the village, far away from the academy. Luckily he had an hour before 8. The blonde gave a small smirk as he used a shunshin to vanish from his spot. Unknowingly someone had watched the blonde's little exit. One Hiruzen had been watching his surrogate little brother through the window and was a little surprised to see said blonde vanish with a C-rank supplementary technique. A child shouldn't be able to do that technique, let alone even mold chakra. "Who exactly are you, Uzumaki Naruto?" he thought. XXX Training Ground 7. XXX Naruto walked into the training ground, finding it empty. Well, not entirely. One young Orochimaru was seen punching one of the newly placed logs. Naruto tried not to sneer, but said sneer just happened to creep onto his face. The blonde wanted nothing but to just kill the future S-rank criminal. He was preventing from doing so when Orochimaru turned around. "Oh, I didn't realize I had an audience." "Hey, you're the Uzumaki kid, it's a pleasure to meet you personally," he said, walking up to Naruto and extending a hand. The blonde wanted so much to be rude and leave him hanging, but he had sort of an epiphany. Maybe he could prevent Orochimaru from ever becoming evil, and he'll become an ally in the future. He smiled and extended his own hand, shaking the hand of what he wanted to be a sure comrade. "And you're Orochimaru. It too is a pleasure to meet one such as yourself." The blonde spoke to the pale child. Though Orochimaru was dressed in a noble-looking kimono, he was outside in the dirt, training to get stronger. At the moment Orochimaru didn't resemble anything dealing with nobility. "So are you here to watch me train, or are you up for a little sparring match?" "To test skills, of course," he spoke, taking a few steps back. "That is if you have the skills," he added, bouncing on the balls of his feet and relaxed into a ready stance. The blonde smirked. Cocky little brat, he thought as he began studying the young fighter in front of him. Based from what he knew about the adult version, Orochimaru was very slippery like any other snake would be. But this Orochimaru was different. The adult was always anticipating the moves of his opponent and was a master strategist, on the level of any Nara. This version wasn't any different, was he? After a minute the blonde finally slid into a stiff stance, not ready to reveal any of his skills at the moment. A come-hither motion later and Orochimaru charged at the blonde. Naruto waited until the last moment to relax his stance and shuffle to the right, narrowly dodging a punch. Apparently he didn't move far enough as Orochimaru dropped and swept him under his feet. Naruto acted fast and shot a hand to the ground and reinforced it with chakra before using it to push off the ground. He vaulted himself a few feet back and landed on his feet. As he landed, Orochimaru was already on him, sending punches and kicks that were all blocked or dodged. I think I spoke too soon. My taijutsu isn't as good as I thought it would be, must be because of the small body, he thought, catching a kick and picking Orochimaru up and throwing him across the field. 5 minutes have passed in the fight and Naruto could tell that Orochimaru was just getting started. With a few hand seals, 3 copies of Orochimaru appear. Let's see if you can handle this, he spoke as the 3 copied children charged. Naruto smirked, letting his Rinnegan flash into existence only for a second. He himself charged, but instead of going for the one in the middle, he veered to the left and sent a punch that knocked the unsuspecting Orochimaru to the ground, the other 2 clones disappearing from existence. My Rinnegan was able to determine which ones were the fakes and which one was real in such a short amount of time. I love this thing, he thought, staring at the boy on the ground. Other than a small amount of blood leaking from his lip, nothing else was visibly wrong with him. Sorry about that, I got a little carried away, Naruto said, extending a hand. Orochimaru shook his head. No apology needed. This just showed me that I need to work on my taijutsu more, he said, allowing Naruto to help him up. And plus I just need to learn to dodge your wicked left hook, he said as they shared a laugh. Well, I must be on my way. I don't want to show up at the academy looking like this, he said, trying and failing to brush the dirt from his kimono. I see you later, Naruto, he said, running back to the village. Naruto sighed, looking down at his own gear. It wasn't as dirty as he thought it would be, maybe because he never ate the floor like Orochimaru did. He was a little sweaty though, but that was nothing. XXX 10 minutes later XXX. The blonde had been walking around for about 10 minutes before he found himself at a spot he spent a lot of time at. Except there was one important thing missing. Where the fuck is the Ichiraku ramen stand? He screamed in his head. Surely I believed Tucci and Sarutobi were the same age, he thought as he witnessed a short boy walking with his father. Said father was walking the boy to civilian school. And Naruto's ears heard the words, "Are you ready for school, Tucci-kun?" And a response, "Hey to-san." Naruto felt like pulling his hair out. He didn't know how long he'd last without the best ramen in the world not existing yet. Classic anime tears fell down his face as he solemnly trudged his way to the academy. With his current pace, it took him a while to enter his classroom. As soon as he sat in his seat, his head dropped onto the desk, sounding a loud thud in the class. The class wasn't full, but there were a few students in there, including Tsunade. They all watched Naruto, not knowing what was the matter. When Naruto felt a hand on his shoulder, he looked up to see Orochimaru there smiling at him. "What's the matter with you? You should be happy you defeated me, because it won't ever happen again," he said, chuckling as he sat down. Naruto smiled. "Yeah, sure, because my win against you was a total fluke," he said with sarcasm practically dripping from his voice. Orochimaru smirked. "You damn rig, wait," he said, his smirk dropping from his face as everyone heard a loud noise. The children turned around to see Jiraiya on his face and a wisp of smoke around him. Naruto looked at the wooden floor to see a long scratch from one of Jiraiya's getas. "Poor Sannin, I hope this doesn't get worse," the blonde thought as Jiraiya wiped his face and quickly appeared behind Tsunade, surprising the blonde at his speed. "Oh, Tsu-chan, please don't pay attention to what just happened. You know you deserve only the best of entrances, babe," he said, taking the female blonde's hand and kissing it. Well, that would have happened if Tsunade didn't use righteous female fury to punch him, a hit that sent him out of the open window. That was on the second floor. "I don't even know you, lecher," she said, rising a fist at the open window. Naruto's eyes widened at the event. Holy crap, it's just like always. Well, at least we weren't on the third floor. Naruto sighed, shaking his head. Shortly after, the teacher walked in the room with Jiraiya on his shoulder. "What just happened?" he asked, setting Jiraiya down. The white-haired child didn't have a scuff of dirt on him, except from when he fell on the floor and his bruised cheek. Sensei must have caught him. Everyone thought the same thing. Well, long story short, the Dabi was being a pervert, Orochimaru said. Naruto cringed a little at hearing that word. What do you mean? The year just started. Orochimaru shrugged his shoulders. Be that as it may, I could already tell he's going to be dead last this year. Naruto shook his head. You never know, a dead last could become a Hokage if he has the proper training, he said, knowing not to affect what happens to Jiraiya's training, due to him becoming a Kage-level ninja in the future. Really, you think I can become that strong? Jiraiya asked with hope in his eyes. Naruto looked at Jiraiya, staring into his eyes, and recognized the look. The need for positive assurance, the look of determination and a hint of hope. The blonde remembered that Jiraiya was an orphan as well and needed this boost of self-esteem. With a nod of the blonde's head, Jiraiya smiled brightly and looked at his sensei. I'm ready for whatever you throw at me, he said confidently. Ryoko's eyes went from Jiraiya to Naruto's. To think he had that kind of ability to bring anybody's self-confidence to the surface. A true morale booster, possibly leadership material. He smiled as he turned around and walked to the front of the class. Excellent, I shall begin your training now. Trust me, you'll stop hating me when it's finished, he said vaguely as all the students took a loud gulp. Oh please, how bad can it be? It's going to be a piece of cake, Naruto unknowingly thought out loud. It was too late as he realized his mistake. Ryoko smirked. Oh really? He said, chuckling darkly. XXX 1 year later XXX. Currently the blonde was evading the strikes of 3 students, Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Orochimaru. Each of the students were wearing dark gray training pants. Naruto was wearing a very dark orange shirt, Tsunade was wearing a dark green blouse, Jiraiya was wearing a dark red shirt, and Orochimaru was wearing dark blue shirt. Of course the colors had a purpose as Naruto dodged another strike and kicked Jiraiya in the stomach. Red! Ryoga yelled. The male blonde released a small sigh of release as he charged at Jiraiya, along with the rest of the participants. Tsunade was the first to approach Jiraiya, sending a punch his way. In desperation for his life, Jiraiya quickly formed a seal before the fist connected with his face. A wooden log replaced the white-haired child. A large dent with multiple cracks appeared on the dense log from Tsunade's punch. Jiraiya appeared in the air behind Orochimaru, kicking at his head. Said child used his snake-like ability and ducked his head under the approaching leg and twisted his body around and grabbed the other foot and slammed Jiraiya to the floor. Sadly for Orochimaru, the body vanished into another log. He couldn't react in time to dodge the next punch. Fortunately he was protected by Naruto, who caught the punch that would have connected with Orochimaru's head. Amazing job protecting your teammate. The male blonde heard his teacher yell from the sidelines. Naruto didn't have time to congratulate himself on the praise as Jiraiya tossed him over his shoulder and quickly swept Orochimaru's feet from under him. Tsunade, who was about to punch Jiraiya, stopped as she heard her sensei yelled, "Blue!" This time it was Orochimaru's turn to evade his classmates. He quickly pushed himself off the ground and formed the ram seal. Shortly after 8 clones appeared around him. Which one is the real me? He said. Jiraiya and Tsunade each turned to Naruto, who always could see through these kinds of tricks. They were surprised to not see him in their sights. Currently Naruto was in the air, having used chakra to rocket himself into the air to prevent any of them from seeing his eyes. He smirked. Just because they're not regular clones doesn't mean you could evade my eyes, he said softly, deactivating his Rinnegan, which he had extreme training for. Attack the one on the far right, he yelled to his teammates as he dropped on the far left and began destroying the Earth clones, with his hands encased in electricity. The sensei Ryoko stood from the sidelines with a proud smile on his face as he watched his absolute best students training in this team exercise. It was obvious that these students mostly benefited from his intense training. The others didn't stay that long after the amount of injuries they sustained. It truly is a shame. He thought, looking at his other students, none of them were special like the four on the training field. They didn't have the mindset to go into the battlefield, and truly, they're not entirely battle-ready at the moment. They're only children after all, but these four are something else entirely. He thought, returning his gaze to the training field. Green! He yelled, seeing Tsunade not become on the defensive. After 5 more minutes of Tsunade defending herself and evading every possible hit, Ryoko ended the training. Excellent, truly amazing, you four are truly my greatest pupils, he said, chuckling. Now for evaluations, Tsunade. Being a girl, I wanted to lighten your training a bit, but I'm glad you forced me not to. You truly are reaping the benefits of my training. Jiraiya, that booster in the beginning of the year was just what you needed to rise up from being a loser in the eyes of your classmates. Orochimaru, a genius in the eyes of many, a prodigy in the eyes of the rest, a true ninja of the era. Lastly, Naruto, I believed you were all talk, but you have proven me wrong with your strategies for battle, and whenever things would go wrong, you were always able to think on your feet, and that is exactly what is needed on the battlefield. I would pass each of you, if I could. He spoke, confusing his students. What do you mean, sensei? Tsunade asked. Of course you could pass us, we're too good to sit in a classroom, Jiraiya said, puffing out his chest. Believe it or not, I agree with the pervert on this one, Orochimaru said. Hey, I'm not just a pervert, Jiraiya said. Jiraiya-dan, Naruto tried to say, but it was too late as he, Tsunade, and Orochimaru covered their ears and closed their eyes. I'm a super pervert, Jiraiya yelled, with huge fireworks erupting out of nowhere. Jiraiya stood in a pose with the peace sign high in the air. Ryoko stood with a tick mark on his head. He promptly smacked the child in the back of the head. What have I said about being an idiot? He said, running a hand through his hair to relieve a bit of his frustration. He let out a huge sigh. Like I was saying, I can't graduate all four of you unless you pass the graduation test in a few years. Also, never in history has there been a 5-man cell, so you four won't be able to be together anyway, he said. Oh, I beg to differ. A voice was heard. Hokage-sama, Ryoko said once he turned around to see whoever disturbed his class. What are you doing here, Hokage-sama? He asked. The Nidame and Sarutobi were seen walking up to the small group. Oh, I was just in the neighborhood and wanted to check on my grandniece and her friends, when I heard what he said, stopping in front of said girl to rub her head. What exactly does that mean? Naruto said softly, smiling, noticing the twinkle in his niece-san's eyes. It means that I have decided to take all four of you as my students. Congratulations, you four will become legends, Hiruzen said, crossing his arms as Naruto cheered, taking his dark orange shirt off and tossed it in the air, before running at the professor. The shirt thudded to the ground with a loud thud. This didn't surprise the class, but it did surprise Ryoko. Wait, Naruto, how much does your shirt weigh? Said Sensei said, walking up to said shirt. The male blonde inwardly cussed himself out for forgetting. 15 pounds like everybody else's, he said. Ryoko stared into Naruto's eyes. You're lying to me, he simply said, picking up the shirt. Now tell me. Naruto mumbled the answer. Excuse me? Ryoko asked. I said 55. The sensei shook his head. Do you understand how reckless that is? You could have injured yourself beyond repair with that much weight, weighing down your small body, he said. At the age of 6, Naruto was very much in shape. His body was very lean and muscular, with a little fat, from the large amounts of food he eats to keep his energy. He kept the perfect balance between muscle and fat. Sensei, he's not the only one, Jiraiya said. I myself have 35 pounds, he said, taking off his own shirt and tossing it behind him. A thud was sounded, like Naruto's. I as well, sensei, Orochimaru said, taking off his own shirt. Everybody stared at Tsunade. What? I only had 25, I'm not crazy like they are, she said, crossing her arms. And I'm not taking my blouse off, she added, glaring at Jiraiya. It's not like you have anything to hide. Flat chest, he said, crossing his own arms. Tsunade growled, What do you expect? I'm 6, she said. And I'm going to kill you. Sannin screamed, ready to use some female fury before Tobirama stopped her. Would you calm down, acting like a bunch of kids? Ryoko said, crossing his arms. We are kids, the 4 children said to their sensei. Oh yeah, I keep forgetting. Because 6-year-olds aren't supposed to be nearing Chunin level, he said with pride etched into his voice, since he did a major part in that. Well, we are a great pair of children, Naruto said offhandedly. Oh no, you Naruto-kun, you're different. I could sense there was something odd about you, apart from the other 3. Ryoko said, taking a small step towards the blonde male. What do you mean? I couldn't possibly be any different, Naruto said, hiding behind Hiruzen. Now that he's said it, Naruto-kun, I do believe I noticed something about you in the past year. You meditate 4 hours only to fall asleep after. You trained yourself continuously before and after school, like you were trying to regain something you lost, he said, scooting Naruto in front of him. I was going to, but I would like to see Ryoko-san test your skills. The blonde glared at Sarutobi before he turned his gaze to Ryoko. Can this at least wait until tomorrow, when I regain my energy? Yeah, come on sensei, at least give Naruto-kun time to prepare for the fight, Tsunade said. And just because he's different doesn't give you any reason to try and fight him, Jiraiya said with anger in his voice. It is illogical to fight a child. You're a jounin for crying out loud, and he's only 6, Orochimaru said. If you fight him, you fight all of us, Jiraiya said, moving in front of Naruto, before being joined by the rest of them. Ryoko stopped. No. Just look at your friend, he's ready for anything, he said as they looked at Naruto. The blonde had his head down, his bangs overshadowing his eyes. A smirk was on his face as he started grinning. You're right, Uchiha-sensei, after all, deception is the most basic skill a shinobi must have. If you're really up to the task, how about I show you just how strong I am? He said, looking up, his Rinnegan eyes on full display. XXX first day of training XXX. Naruto was seen with what looked like a 15-pound boulder on his shoulders, while walking on a bridge of earth surrounded by water with water sharks lurking waiting for him. I may have spoken too soon, Naruto mumbled to himself as he began walking across the bridge, 1 foot at a time. On top of the boulder was Ryoko, further weighing it down. He was currently laughing his ass off. Do you fear my training now, Naruto-kun? Is it still easy for you, or do I need to up the ante? He said, laughing more. Naruto took another sturdy step. Why do I have to do this exercise, while everybody else only has a boulder? They don't have a bridge or nothing. You're a sadist, he said, taking another step. Oh please, this is a piece of cake, is it not? The sensei said, laughing louder. Naruto turned to the others. What are you still doing here? Run, this guy is crazy, he said, only for a kunai to drop from above and slightly cut his cheek before a whip came out of nowhere and hit his behind. Go faster, Naruto-kun, I thought you said it was going to be easy, he said, laughing again as he whipped Naruto again. You're crazy, he said as he went faster. It's a madhouse, a madhouse. And finally I have finished this chapter, and I'm so sorry for the long wait. Let me just tell you, I hate school, and I'm so glad I'm almost finished with it. But wait, I have to go to college. No. Oh well, don't worry, I'm not dead yet. I've just been busy, really busy. I suffer from anxiety every time I think about my future, and when that happens I just hit the books when that happens. No time for anything except reading stories, not writing. But aren't you glad it's the weekend and I had access to the computer? I know I am, 'cause if I had it my way I would have been released this chapter to the world. Also, let me just get this out. Thank all of you that review last chapter. 40 reviews, the highest I've ever gotten for a chapter. Ever. So yeah, thank you for reading, and let's give that reviewing thing another try. JJ is out.